Thank you for tuning in to the Logic of God podcast. I'm Cody.
I'm Gina.
And I'm Ben.
If you're returning, thank you for coming back. And if you are a new guest, welcome.
So, the last Genesis episode that we did was probably one of my favorite episodes we've done so far because we talked about Jacob wrestling with an unknown man.
Jesus.
God. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the consensus we came out with.
Yeah. And now we're back to Genesis 33 where Jacob and Esau reconnect. And it's really interesting, but anticlimactic.
But there's still somewhat of a dramatic build-up to this moment, and there are small changes to the arrangement of events that make it clear that Jacob is still afraid, but he has faith. Like, he's confident in God's promise, but he's still taking precautions. And I still hear people claim that's wrong, that he should have basically just had his full family with him and just boldly strolled in and acted like Esau wasn't going to do anything bad. But no, I don't think, we talked about this in the previous episode. It's stupid to assume that you know exactly the way that God is going to make things work. It's basically the sin of presumption. You can't say that you know exactly how God is going to do something. You can have faith that God is going to deliver you, but you don't know how. And so Jacob is confident that this is going to turn out okay, but he doesn't know if his family is going to be killed in this. He still is aware that there is some risk, and so he goes forward in faith, but you can see that he's still afraid. But there's no courage without fear. It would be pointless at this point in the story if he was like, no, I have no fear whatsoever. There's nothing to overcome at that point.
Yeah, there's no way. And you got to realize, like, the context of Jacob's upbringing, like his father being almost sacrificed. God is going to ask difficult things or do difficult things. So you can't know exactly what God's going to do or how he's going to work out his will.
So let's read some scriptures. Genesis 33. And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 female servants, and he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children, he said, Who are these with you? Jacob said, The children whom God has graciously given your servant. Then the servants drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And last Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, What do you mean by all this company that I met? Jacob answered, To find favor in the sight of my Lord. But Esau said, No, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. Jacob said, No, please, if I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. Please accept my blessing that is brought to you because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. Thus he urged him, and he took it.
So there are a few things here that stand out to me. One, I think most of us know the story of Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. We know that eventually the brothers turn on Joseph and they absolutely hate him. And we tend to see the brothers as the bad guys in that story, and to be fair, they are. But you see the seeds planted pretty early on for that eventuality. Because as soon as Jacob sees potential danger, he arranges his family in the order at which it's going to be most important for them to survive. And he takes the children of his servants and he puts them first. And then Leah is third. And then lastly, Rachel and Joseph are last. And you can see, one, as we said before, the children of Rachel's servant, he does not consider to be Rachel's children. He considers them to be the children of her slave. So Rachel's plan to have children by surrogacy does not work. And it's pretty clear also that Rachel doesn't view them as her children either. So already that was not a good plan. But also, you see that Jacob clearly and obviously values certain children more than others and certain wives more than others. And that is constantly being reinforced to the entire family.
It's hard for me to know if I'm sure that it is based in favoritism, but also logic, because Joseph is the youngest. So while he is the youngest, it makes sense that he would be in the back.
Simultaneously, the children of the servants were younger than the children of Leah, some of them.
Yeah, there was
because
Leah
those were
had a
taken
mix.
later. Yeah. So it's not purely about the age of the children. I agree. I'd thought of that too. But it seems ultimately this is in the order at which he wants them to survive. Now, he still puts himself first. He's the first one to show up. And this is good. It means that he values them more than him. If things go wrong, he's going to be the one to be attacked and everyone else has more time to run. However, Rachel is the one who has the most time to run along with Joseph. So we're starting to see the seeds of that discord and the reasons for the hatred of the other brothers towards Joseph being sown here. But also, there's a lot of talk about Esau and his character and whether or not Jacob really loved Esau. And the reaction here, Esau running to him and them actually weeping together. The fact that they weep and the fact that Jacob says to Esau, seeing your face is like seeing the face of God. It seems pretty clear to me that Jacob does love his brother. Now, there are some things that happen later that confuse things a little bit. And I can see why people think, no, he's lying to Esau here. He's just trying to say whatever he can to get out of this. But no, I don't believe that. He is genuinely weeping with them, and I do believe in the context of what we've just seen in the previous chapter, he's saying it's like seeing the face of God. Seeing you is like seeing God's face, and he's saying that because he has just seen God's face. And to know the forgiveness and the love of his brother is like seeing the face of God. I think that's true.
It's a very, after the wonder that he experienced is saying that he had seen God and survived, it's a very profound thing for him to say. And knowing historically how precious the name of God was and the face of God was, I don't think that he would take saying something like that lightly. I could be wrong, but...
Yeah, this is interesting to me, like the bowing 7 times, the seeing the face of God. Like, I don't know exactly what to make of it, because a lot of that is in any temple building. Like when you're building a new temple, like one of the ritual practices would be you would bow to the God 7 times before, as part of the opening of the mouth ceremony type thing. And then also the connection here, I can't help but see the parable of the prodigal son. Like the running, the kiss, that imagery there. And Esau here would be playing the father in that type of role and is welcoming back Jacob, the deceiver, into the family. But we also know that Jacob is the chosen by God. Just some interesting parallels there that didn't know quite how to make sense of those. But a lot of the Jewish interpretations and historic value that they saw in this did view it as Jacob is just trying to survive. Like the kiss, they noted that the kiss of Esau was placating Jacob. It wasn't a real kiss. Like a lot of the earlier manuscripts have 2 dots indicating that they think it could be perceived differently. But from what I understand and read of it, I don't think that's the case.
If you go just verses 1 through 11, then it would be really easy to just believe that this is real and authentic and they were happy to see each other. But then as you go through verses 12 through 20, you see it take a weird turn of treachery, not treachery, but it seems like Jacob tricks Esau and doesn't want to go with him and doesn't really trust him. And it seems like Esau doesn't really trust Jacob either, because he's offering to leave men and he's trying to urge them on. And I think Esau is kind of wondering what Jacob is doing there.
Yeah, and one of the things we mentioned in the previous chapter is the 400 men is a big indicator that Esau was prepared for war. So he didn't know what to make of Jacob's encounter either. So there's definitely tensions on both sides leading up to this point, at the very least. The 400 men indicates that he was prepared for battle. Jacob, we don't know how many were in his caravan specifically. I would think that he had some other servants and shepherds and all of that in his company, but definitely tensions on both sides leading into this point.
I think people want the stories of the Bible to read exactly like that, like stories. And in a nice, tidy storybook ending to this section of the story of Jacob and Esau, it would be really nice for them to show up and hug each other and weep and cry, and for all the sentiments to be aired out, and then to just walk off arm in arm and have the whole family together and they all lived happily ever after. That's not what happens, and that's not realistic either. These two men have not seen each other for over 20 years at this point.
And they don't trust each other. They have good reasons.
Yes, they have very good reasons to not trust each other, because one, Esau claimed that he was going to kill Jacob. And also, Jacob, whether rightfully or not, and yes, he did have a right to what he stole, but he did steal something. He did take something deceptively. And he's been gone for a really long time and is showing up with tons and tons of flocks and herds and presumably, like you said, Cody, a lot of people. So Esau doesn't know what's going on, and he's asking, who are all these people? But it's also really beautiful and I think genuine that despite all of the apprehension that the two men probably do have towards each other, legitimately and understandably, they do still at the end of the day love one another. And they are happy to see one another. And I think they do both hope that everything is going to turn out all right. But this is true to life. This isn't a story someone made up. This is the reality. It's two people who don't know each other anymore, but do still love each other because they're brothers. So we shouldn't expect things to be tidy. And there is still some messiness to this story. And they don't trust one another. And they continue to act as though they love one another. They don't and can't trust one another. Because at this point, they are two blossoming nations. And I think that's something that tends to be ignored in this story. They're not just two individuals. They are the startings of two different nations, Edom and Israel. And eventually they do come to blows. A bit down the line, but eventually they're not friends anymore.
Yeah, go read Obadiah. It talks a lot about that conflict. It's a short one, but a good one.
We'll get there eventually.
Yeah, but that's one that like goes out of order a little bit because you have to jump ahead several chapters in the Old Testament before you get to Obadiah, but it's all about the lessons that you can learn between the Israelites and the Edomites.
Yeah, it's where their tensions peak.
So let's keep reading. Then Esau said, "Let us journey on our way, and I will go ahead of you." But Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the nursing flocks and herds are a care to me. If they are driven hard for one day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I will lead on slowly at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me, and at the pace of the children until I come to my Lord in Seir." So Esau said, "Let me leave with you some of the people who are with me." But he said, "What need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord." So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. But Jacob returned to Succoth and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore, the name of the place is called Succoth. It's interesting here because Esau seems to think that Jacob will naturally attempt to go into his village or wherever it is that he's living. And Jacob implies that he is, but he ends up going somewhere different and building a house there and setting up a life there that has nothing to do with Esau and is not in Esau's land.
So one of the difficult things about translation is that you have to try to figure out what the point of the text is. And a random word can dramatically change the meaning behind what's being said. So like in verse 17, Jacob, however, went to Succoth. And you're right, Gina. The addition of the word however implies that there was this assumption he was going to go in the same direction as Esau. However, the original Hebrew, if we're translating it as directly as possible, it's, "And Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built himself a house." There's no however, there's no and yet, but it's just saying what he did. The however is added to show the contrast between what we would expect and what happens.
What translation are you in?
Original Hebrew.
Okay, so you're not in a specific Bible translation that is easy for our listeners.
I'm in right now is BibleHub.com. Genesis chapter 33, verse 17. That would be Yaakov nasa Sukkata And Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built himself a house.
Yeah, mine doesn't have the however in the ESV, and I still came to that conclusion.
But that different translations will have the individual words to try to reinforce an idea. And so it's tough to know if the text is trying to tell us that Jacob went off in a direction on his own, contrary to the expectations of Esau.
I think in verse 18 where it says Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, like he was, the only way that he could come safely is if there was the possibility of peril, in my opinion.
And like even leading up to that, like Esau's let us journey on our way and I'll go ahead of you. Like it implies in earlier texts that Jacob and Esau are traveling together at that point, or were going to travel together.
And I think Jacob was like, I'm not going there, especially not with 400 men. If he has enough men that he can spare 400 just to come and meet me because he's not sure what I'm doing, then what am I walking into?
We also have to remember that the inciting incident of this chapter is that Jacob thought there was going to be a fight. He trusted God. He knew that everything was going to be okay, but he was still expecting some trouble. And so when this chapter is concluding and it's saying that he came peacefully to the city, it's just reinforcing the idea that there was no conflict between the two brothers. So I see what you're saying, and it's possible. It's possible to interpret it that way.
How do you interpret it?
I'm not really sure how to interpret it, if I'm honest. Because no matter what, it's clear that the two brothers don't fully trust one another. However, it's tough to know exactly how much contact they had with each other, if they were continuing to meet with one another more individually. I don't know. What seems clear is that they both ended up going their separate ways, and they needed to. I'm not sure if they were being deceptive towards one another, if they were trying to do something.
Again, reading further up, Jacob says, let my Lord pass ahead of his servant, and I will lead on slowly at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me and at the pace of the children until I come to my Lord, that is Esau, in Seir. So Jacob is implying that he's going to follow Esau there.
Yes. And for all we know, Jacob by himself eventually does, but the rest of his family stays behind. That's why I said the however is important, because it implies that he did not. We don't actually know if Jacob by himself ended up going to see Esau and continue the conversation and spend more time with him. We do know that his whole family didn't. That's why I'm saying there's some ambiguity.
I'm confused because then it says in 16, so Esau returned that day on his way to Seir, but Jacob journeyed to Succoth. So it seems like they parted at that point.
But I think Esau was expecting that Jacob would arrive.
Yes, because Jacob said
with the whole group.
Because Jacob said he was going to do that, but he doesn't do that.
So he's gone against what he has agreed to do, and he's being crafty. That's
how I read it.
Yeah,
it could be.
I mean that's the context of from 12 to 17 is how I read it, because Jacob is saying that he's going to follow his Lord, that is Esau, to Seir. And then it says, but Jacob journeyed.
So it's and Jacob journeyed to Succoth. That's why I'm saying it's important because the but and the however are very important modifiers that are meant to accentuate the contrast.
In the Genesis Rabbah, though, which is pretty respected, that Midrash says, he said, I will come to my Lord in Seir, but he did not go. Rabbi Abahu said, was Jacob a liar? No, he meant he would come to him in the days of the Messiah. So there's that. Then there's the pseudo-Jonathan, which we don't like. But then there's some other Jewish traditions that talk about how Jacob misled Esau to protect himself and that it was a survival tactic.
I'm not saying that interpretation is wrong. I'd say that's the predominant interpretation, that Jacob did lie to Esau and took his family in another direction. However, we do eventually see the two men reuniting after Isaac's death, and there's no massive conflict. And we're not told much about their future encounters with one another. Like, after finding out that Jacob tricked him again, why did he not show up again? Because he knows where he is.
Jacob left him so much wealth in the gifts that he sent, and he also continuously kept saying, let me find favor in your sight. So I think Esau knew Jacob was afraid of him. If I was a man that was very skilled in fighting, not necessarily the mental skill, but the physical side, Like, it would be easy for me to know when I'm intimidating him, especially since I grew up with him.
Yeah,
Like,
I don't know.
Jacob had to play mind games to get Esau to do what he wanted, but I think Esau was skilled in other ways.
It's possible. And there's no reason to split too many hairs on this. Ultimately, Jacob didn't end up building a house near where Esau lived, and they weren't one big happy family.
Yeah,
and
but
they couldn't be.
Why do you think Esau offered to have people stay with Jacob?
It's tough to know exactly because, again, we're not told what people were thinking. And I do genuinely believe that Esau was happy to see Jacob. And if he wanted to, he could have just sent the whole army of 400 men and taken everything. If the point was to be manipulative on Esau's part, or to infiltrate the camp, or to kill anybody, he could have just done it. And later on, when Jacob seemingly tricks him, he doesn't send the 400 men into Jacob's camp and take everything anyway. It's clear that Jacob doesn't have the manpower to fight Esau, and he doesn't, even if he did, he doesn't have the ability because Jacob is not, by his nature, a fighter. So no matter what, their future interactions at Isaac's funeral, when the time comes and they meet up again, and the fact that they meet up and they weep together, it seems to indicate to me Esau doesn't mean anything bad for Jacob. But no matter what, they are two blossoming nations, and no matter what, I think Jacob and maybe eventually Esau recognizes that they are the start of two nations. They're not compatible, and they need to go their separate ways.
No, I would agree with that for sure. The idea, like I think we were talking about before, like the idea that Lot and Abraham had too big of flocks to be with each other, like surely that they had too big of a flocks that they needed to spread out as well. And the biblical narrative seems to leave Esau and Jacob at least on good terms. And there is that brief mention of them coming together to bury Isaac when he dies. And even like Jubilees goes into detail about that of Esau and Jacob were on good terms. Where Jubilees stems off of that is when Esau's sons realize that they're not going to get the inheritance of Isaac after he dies, they attack Jacob and then convince Esau, and then Jacob kills Esau.
Yeah, but what's weird is that Jubilees, again, doesn't cover this story. I don't know what it is about this block of time in the Bible, but Jubilees seems to be allergic to this point. Like, it doesn't mention Jacob wrestling with God. It doesn't really talk much about Laban and his pursuit of Jacob. And it doesn't really talk about Jacob and Esau in this particular story. So it just seems weird to me that out of all the things to talk about in Genesis, this is just the area where Jubilees glosses over everything.
I don't know. So Jubilees, you see it elaborate more on areas where you feel Genesis doesn't elaborate on. So maybe the author of Jubilees thought that there was plenty of detail and context to this specific story because the wrestling with God and everything, what could you add to that?
I would have thought that the Agada had enough information, but they have a lot more into that too.
Yeah, even still, there wasn't a whole lot of detail in Agada at all for what Isaac was thinking. It was all from Abraham's perspective.
Yeah, that's fair.
They go into, so you see that balance there. I'm not saying that's one way or the other, but maybe that's what the author was thinking. I don't know. There's areas that they elaborate on that's, you went way off in left field over here for Jubilees, and you just leave us hanging here. Answer some questions here for us, please.
I will say it is a significant distance. Like, just looking at the map, Seir is about 130 miles away from Shechem. And even it could be up to 180 miles. So it's a 7 to 10 day trip by caravan.
Is Beersheba on there at all?
No.
Because I think that's where Isaac settled, right? Was
so
Beersheba?
Seir is the mountainous region known as Edom. And Mount Seir is located south of the Dead Sea in Jordan. And then Shechem is located in the central hill country of Canaan in the West Bank.
So it makes sense to me that Jacob wouldn't settle in Edom because that's the region of his brother. He's just come from Laban's area, from Laban's territory, and he already had a lot of issues spending 6 years there. Not to mention the fact that his family historically has had issues setting up their camps in other people's territory. So it makes sense for him to go his own way, a decent distance from his brother, but he's not an insurmountable distance away from his brother. He's still basically a neighbor. but he's setting up his camp and his people and his grazing lands away from all that. Now, it's still, as it turns out, not the best place for him to be, and we'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But
one other differential that needs to be mentioned is in verse 17. Jacob went to Succoth first, and then he went to Shechem. But it's interesting that he built himself a house in Succoth instead of just erecting tents. And maybe that's what this means. I don't know the language, but it's interesting that he stopped and built himself a house in Succoth, and then he ended up in Shechem later. So there is an undisclosed length of time where he lived different places. And so it's possible, Ben, that he did go back and see his brother at some point, but it would have been a very significant undertaking.
And I think ultimately he'd probably do it himself rather than bringing his whole family.
Yeah, because at that point they wouldn't unite tribes. And I wonder if Esau, I don't know the lineage well enough, if Esau inherited any of like the Ishmaelite territory.
I don't know. That's a good
question. Because he married
an
Ishmaelite.
Yeah, he had 2 Ishmaelite brides, I think.
Could be.
I'd have to look into that one.
Okay, so finishing out the chapter, Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, on his way from Padan Aram, and he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the piece of land on which he had pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. That's it. That's 33. It's just weird to me that in verse 17, he's building a house in Succoth, but then he goes and buys land somewhere else and just pitches a tent. Maybe he had a vacation home or something.
And he builds an altar there, like another altar, and he names it God, the God of Israel.
I think this actually builds on the idea he's still a sojourner, just like his dad and his dad before him. It's a land that is his, and yet he doesn't get to stay there. He builds the home in Sukkoth, but then he leaves. And then he buys a piece of land and builds an altar, but then he leaves. And then
there's pieces of permanence, but he never stays. He's a nomad. And it's a great tie-in to the next chapter.
It is.
So moving on. I want to give a quick warning because we're moving into Genesis 34. So this is a hybrid episode where we've covered more than one chapter. Genesis 34 contains sensitive content that is not suitable for young ears. So if you're listening with your children present, proceed with caution and just maybe put us on pause until you're alone and can listen in privacy, because there is some sexual content in this one as well as a lot of killing.
We will cover it as delicately as we can. Mm-hmm. There is no sugarcoating what happens here.
Yes. So Dinah is the daughter of Leah, and I'm going to read the first couple of verses here in 34. So Dinah is the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, and she went out to see the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. And his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this girl for my wife." So already we're seeing some interesting things happen. One, Leah's daughter has gone out to see the women of the land. The women of the land would be the women in this area in Canaan. And there's some interesting ideas of why Dinah would have done this. Some Jewish tradition says that she inherited her mother's outgoing nature and she was being friendly and curious. There is a Jewish tradition that calls it like an innocent social visit made by a teenager or a young adult that was curious about social norms. It's also said that she could have just been going out, but a woman going out alone or unprotected often symbolized vulnerability and transgression. This is interesting because Rachel was on her own as a shepherdess, but here you can really see the keen vulnerability for Dinah and her family. And then Proverbs 7 talks about adulterous women who wander and lurk outside. So there's a lot. And then Jubilees covers it, saying, "Let the daughters of Israel not walk alone among the daughters of the nations." So this encouragement to keep people separated, and also a cautionary tale. And then the Targum Pseudo-Jonathan talks about it, how she was curious. And there's like a tie there to Eve and Lot's wife and how curiosity for women is not a good thing. But Genesis doesn't blame Dinah or condemn her visiting these women. There's no language that would make us think she brought this on herself. So it's important to note that there's extra biblical traditions that put different spins on it, but ultimately Genesis doesn't have any kind of condemning language here.
No, and I think an important thing to remember is that Dinah has exclusively brothers, and she's grown up in a family caravan where it's almost all dudes. Like, there are the 4 women who are in her family, who are, one is her mother and the other are her, I guess, stepmothers, you could consider them. I'm not really sure what the
Sister mothers?
Yeah, it's weird. But it's not an optimal situation, and I'm sure she's grown up with a decent amount of strife all around her, and no sisters or no other women really to commune with, to have fun with. And from what I see here, just in the initial first verse for 34, it seems like she just wanted to go and find other women because she doesn't have any exposure to them and she wants to have friends. And the age that she's at, Jubilee says that she's 12. I think that's a reasonable assumption. It is an assumption. It's not explicitly said in Genesis how old Dinah was at this point. However, there are 2 different words used for her. One of them is in verse 3. She's referred to as Hana'ara. Hana'ara means the young woman. So that does indicate she is a woman, a young woman. However, she's also referred in verse 4 as Yalda. A Yalda is prepubescent.
And the point here that's so disturbing is that Shechem is the one that calls her that.
Yes. The overlap between those 2 words seems to be 12 because it's not quite old enough to be a woman, but not young enough to be a little girl. That seems to be the area that she's at. She's young, she's inquisitive, she wants to experience the world, she's innocent. And so that puts an extra layer of tragedy on what happens to her. This isn't her fault, and she's a kid, and she has all brothers, and she goes out, and then a man takes her and rapes her, and then suddenly does a 180 and starts speaking tenderly to her, and then comes to the dad like nothing has happened, and is, no, let me marry her.
So I think we need to definitively say that this is rape. It's
Yes.
sexual assault. It was not consensual. And even though Shechem was drawn to her, he loved her, spoke tenderly to her, and asks to take her as a wife and not just leave her humiliated, we still have to keep in consideration that this is not a romantic situation. This isn't something where they're going to make the most of it because he spoke tenderly to her and he really liked her. No, he saw her for what she was, which is an innocent young girl, and it does not make her deserving or consenting of her fate. And this is relatable to today when you think about how abusers can hook their victims. They're convincing. They talk a good game, but their tongue has the power of life and death, and their actions have the power of life and death. And to me, this is meaningful because it's easy for people to think historically she was in a tough situation and culturally her value is stolen, and so no other man would think her worthy of marriage. And so at least this way she could become a wife and a bride and do all of the things that she would have been able to do if she wasn't raped. But that's not the case. And either way, it doesn't matter how tenderly he spoke to her, he abused her. And I think her brothers see that for what it is.
Yeah, and I think Jacob did too. Like when later on Jacob finds out and like he holds his peace until the family can commune and discuss it.
Yeah, so in verse 5, it says, "Now Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob held his peace until they came. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. The sons of Jacob had come in from the fields as soon as they heard of it, and the men were indignant and very angry, because he had done an outrageous thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing must not be done. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, 'The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife. Make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. You shall dwell with us, and the land shall be open to you. Dwell and trade in it, and get property in it.' Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, 'Let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me I will give. Ask me for as great a bride price and gift as you will, and I will give whatever you say to you. Only give me the young woman to be my wife.'" They're negotiating.
Yeah, they're negotiating over the fact that a little girl's innocence was taken. And it's tough because Hamor seems to very much recognize how screwed up everything is. And I'm not sure really how to take Hamor in this story. It seems like he's trying to do the best that he can with the sick, twisted thing that his son has done. That said, this still feels like the wrong way to go about it, and it seems like he's almost trying to capitalize on it.
Yeah, he's being diplomatic, saying, give your daughters to us and take our daughters for yourselves. It seems like he doesn't know them well because that's the only daughter. Like, your daughters, no, there's one and you took her already. Don't come and ask me for what you already took.
And the idea of just trying to incorporate, like it's...
Assimilate.
Yeah, trying to bring in the wealth of Jacob and make it a part of his city. Like I don't know how to feel about this guy. I don't know if he's trying to capitalize on this situation, if he sees potential in the situation, or if he's genuinely just trying to fix this and he loves his son and he doesn't want to have his son executed for forcing himself on a little girl, but he still wants something to be done to try to make it right in some way. I don't really know.
When it comes down to it for me, if you were to go to the mall today and steal something of great value, and then after the fact be like, I'm willing to pay for it, but only because I got caught, like, you'd still go to jail. So I think he's trying to sweet talk his way out of theft and the consequences that come with that. And also, like, Jacob did have a large group, and they probably did pose quite a threat to the city. And he probably was somewhat afraid of what the fallout would be. Although I do want to point out before we move forward that based on like just the general ages of the boys, I wrote down their ages, but like Simeon, he was as young as 15 and Levi was as young as 13. They could have been as old as 18 and 20. So they were teenagers basically when this happened. And that's notable because while this man, Hamor, is trying to negotiate, he sees the threat, but also like maybe doesn't because they're all teenagers. Like they're the oldest. Like Jacob is the oldest man.
Yes.
In the family. And the others are still boys. Like I don't think they're even married.
No, they're not at this point. And they do act like really, really angry teenagers in this story. Just about everything in this story is tragic. What happens to Dinah, the response, and then the ultimate act of revenge on behalf of their sister, and then what happens to the city. We'll get to that in a second. But literally everything in this story is very sad and very screwed up.
Moving on in the scriptures, verse 13. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to them, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you will become as we are by every male among you being circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to ourselves, and we will dwell with you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter, and we will be gone. Their words pleased Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem, and the young man did not delay to do the thing, because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most honored of all his father's house. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, these men are at peace with us. Let them dwell in the land and trade in it, for behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters as wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will the men agree to dwell with us to become one people. When every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised, will not their livestock, their property, and all their beasts be ours? Only let us agree with them, and they will dwell with us. And all who went out of the gate of the city listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city. So basically they're like, you have to assimilate like us, wink.
Yeah, this is... there's a lot of depth in this because them being asked to circumcise themselves if done properly, would be them being accepted in as Israelites. They would become part of Israel, part of the chosen people, if they're being circumcised and claiming Yahweh as their God. We see that they at least do part of that, so we don't know if they fully assimilate into Israel. I would argue that they didn't, but...
No, because of their goals. Like, they're like trying to take this property. It's not the circumcision of the heart.
Yeah, so very interesting. And it says the sons of Jacob, but most of the Jewish tradition in this seems to remove Jacob from this situation, which I don't think is accurate. Jacob waits to have his sons there present with him. The father goes and speaks to Jacob. It seems like Jacob's sons are responding, speaking for Jacob in this situation, but he is there as well. A lot of the narrative and tradition and extra biblical stuff has Jacob completely removed from this situation, which I don't see in the text.
Yeah, but it's tough to know exactly what his involvement is. As far as the negotiations, it's possible that he was involved in that and was, again, trying to make the best of a bad situation. And what's very interesting about that is that a similar situation ends up happening with David, where one of his daughters is also raped by one of his sons, and he doesn't really do anything about it. He tries to be diplomatic, and then it ends up being that one of his other sons, Absalom, takes revenge on behalf of his sister. And so I wouldn't want to say that's like a full parallel. I don't know how much Jacob knew, but you're right, Cody. It is clear that he was familiar. Like he held off on saying anything because he knew until his sons were back. So he was somewhat party to these negotiations. And it's possible that he was trying to think, what's done is done. So I guess the best thing to do going forward would be to unite Dinah with Shechem, since it's already done. And then we can make the best of a very bad situation. That's not what the text explicitly says, and yet we know that Jacob was aware of what was going on. What we do also know is that after what comes next, and we'll get to it in a second, Jacob's not happy with what his sons end up doing. So it's tough to know exactly how involved he is. We do know that what happens next is something he doesn't sign off on.
So, verse 25, on the third day when they were sore, 2 of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field, all their wealth, all their little ones and their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and plundered. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household." But they said, "Should he treat our sister like a prostitute?" So there's a lot here. Obviously, Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, seem to have pulled off a great heist. They've tricked the men of the city into incapacitating themselves all at the same time so that they can go in and kill them. And it's insane to think about 2 teenage boys with swords being enough to take down that many men. Because historically, if you look at the average size of a village or a city during that time, they would have killed like 300 to 500 men. Like 2 teenage boys and maybe Jacob.
Yeah, it's much more achievable, though, than someone in the modern context hearing the word city. They probably think, what, they killed like thousands of people? No, it was still an amount that is possible for 2 guys to do, 2 teenagers to run in. Because a lot of these guys were bedridden. They probably had infections. They weren't getting up from the bed for nothing at this point. And so during this time, they were able to take advantage of the fact that these men were incapacitated and just brutally murder them. And it's not a pretty story, and it's not meant to be. It's not meant to be something that glorifies Jacob and his family. It's a low point for them.
If you think about, like, we've had conversations about situations in our community and experiences that we've had as families and what we would do if somebody hurt our kids, or what we would do if, what we want to happen to a bad person who did a bad thing to a child. And I don't feel like Simeon and Levi are unjustified here. It's hard because, and we can talk about it as we get through this outline, but it's hard for me to say anything against what they did, even though it was murder, because I would be that angry too.
It's understandable.
Yeah.
However, I wouldn't sign off on it morally.
No.
Because for one, not all of the men in this village were involved in what happened. But also, two, the fact is they did circumcise themselves. Now, I'm with you, Cody. I don't think that this was an act that actually made them a part of Israel, even if the agreement had gone through. And also, this is an agreement that never should have happened. Because we saw previously a similar situation, a much more favorable and good situation, was opened up both to Abraham and to Isaac. The Hittites literally asked Abraham to become one of them. They're like, no, we're going to give you this land. And Abraham's, no, I'm not going to take this land from you as a gift. I'm going to pay you for it. We are distinct peoples. I am not a part of you. You can't consider me to be one of you. I will not be buried with you. And that sucks because they loved him and he loved them, but he saw that they had to be separate people. And we're seeing in this situation an infinitely worse situation.
It almost feels like blasphemy to say, do the thing that God says to do to become one of God's chosen people so that you're set apart too. Like, it's supposed to be a mark of obedience and submission to the Lord. And it's one of the most private, intimate parts of a man's body. And it's very covenantal. And God was not ordaining. This was not something where God was like, you can circumcise yourself and circumcise your males and you're God's chosen people, but also you can adopt chosen people. And it just feels blasphemous to me and disrespectful to the Lord in the way that it was handled. And in Jewish tradition, the acts of Simeon and Levi are respected. They're thought of as a good thing. But I feel uncomfortable with using this mark of the Lord in such a way.
Levi literally does not get an inheritance in the land of Israel for this. All the other tribes of Israel get land allotted to them. But Levi, his allotment is the Lord.
Yeah, that's not directly connected to this.
Okay.
Because Simeon still gets...
Sure.
But Jacob does curse both of them for their anger problems in later chapters. So we know, Jacob is aware of it. God is aware of it. There are problems. And the story of Joseph, you get a great look into the anger issues and the hatred that they're capable of. So it's not far-fetched.
I don't know. I see this chapter asking us to think about a lot of different things. The problem of evil and righteous anger is in the forefront of our faces. The repercussions for the actions of people is right in the forefront of our faces. And I think when we cover chapter 35, it will speak a lot more into this because they're connected. These aren't breaks. This isn't like a break in the narrative. 34 goes directly into 35. But I think it's key to note that Jacob's rebuttal of this situation is not that they have defiled themselves against God. They've made a stink against God. It's the inhabitants of the land. Jacob is fearful of the repercussions for the inhabitants of Canaan, not from God. And God directly tell Jacob what to do next steps in 35, but it's not a rebuttal of what happened. And I think I'm not condoning it one way or another, but I do think there is a lot to be said for the actions here and how far is too far for righteous justice, how far is too far because we know later on in Israel law, rape is a punishable upon death. And there's a lot of other, James is specifically to a Jewish audience, and James 4, I think 17 talks about if you know that something is a sin and you do nothing to change it, you're complicit of committing that sin as well. And there's also a famous quote attributed to Bonhoeffer, but it's more likely a paraphrase. Silence in the face of evil itself is evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to do is to do. And that's connected to that James 4 verse where we are not called to be inactive in pursuing righteous justice. Again, not condoning what happened here, not saying one way or another, but I think that's what the text is trying to pull out and play in our minds. How far is too far, and what is righteous justice? Because when we get into the laws of Israel, it is well within the means of the family's household to kill the person who raped their family member. And that is God's law.
So, yeah, drawing, again, the parallel between this story and David and Absalom, I think there are, you're right, a lot of questions about how far is too far. But I think also there is a measure of inaction that Jacob seems to take in this story that he should not have done. This is his daughter. And while we're not always told every detail about these stories, we're told explicitly about the anger of her brothers, not the anger of Jacob. And it's the brothers who take the action, Jacob does not. Similarly, in the story of David and Absalom, David does nothing. In the end, he doesn't take action against the son that rapes his daughter. And Absalom, seeing that in action, takes action into his own hands. And it's that action that sends him on a trajectory that leads him head to head with his father. Now, that doesn't mean that Absalom's action was right. It doesn't mean it was wrong. The Bible doesn't explicitly tell us. And that's a frustrating thing about the Bible. It doesn't always tell you when an action is right or wrong. It tells you what happened, and it leaves you to try to piece it out yourself based on the moral things the Bible talks to us about. I understand Levi and Simeon's anger here. And had they gone and killed just Shechem, I would have understood that. And if Jacob had taken some action as well on behalf of his daughter, also I would have understood that. I think there are a lot of bad decisions that were made in this story, but in the end, I think it's almost inexcusable for Jacob to have done what he did, which seemingly is nothing, to try to make a deal with the people who stole and raped his daughter, rather than seek justice for her. And it was on her two brothers to do that for her.
Think about what he says at the end, okay? In verse 30. You have brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household. I don't want to get too personal, but there was a time in my high school life where I had a friend that got sexually assaulted, and I didn't know what to do, and I went to my mother, and she was like, she was at a party, she brought it on herself. If you go into a situation where someone is so profoundly victimized like Dinah here, and the response is, what about me? This doesn't look good for our family. You're shaming the victim and saying it would have been better to pretend like it didn't happen than to make the neighbors angry. That's what he's effectively saying.
His focus is, again, it's reasonable somewhat. In any other context, if this was just a normal family dispute, if it was just someone stole something and him saying, let's go along to get along. But in context, he's saying, we should have gone along to get along. And your sister was raped. My daughter was raped. She was taken from us. And so we should have just gone along with it. And the brother's response is, you were going to let them treat her like a prostitute.
It shows, unfortunately, it shows Jacob's lack of respect for Leah. It shows Jacob's lack of respect for his daughter. And it shows what's truly important to him. And in one hand, the covenant promise from God over this family generationally has been carried out perfectly. And he is trying to continue that even in his wrestling and doubt that he has struggled with. But also, at what point do you get angry? Like, you get good and mad about the fact that the surrounding cities and civilizations are not aligned at all with what God is asking you to do. And it is very hard to exist in a world like that. Like we struggle with that today. And some of the Jewish texts like warn young women against being infiltrated by culture. And the church today, the modern non-denominational church, is so infiltrated by the world.
One of the biggest lessons I take away from this particular story, as tragic and terrible and twisted as it is, there are going to be points where you are the person who needs to take action. Reasonably, the authority rests on your shoulders to make something right. If you don't do it, someone else will, a person who isn't supposed to take that action.
It's not even just that, Ben. It's if we as Christians are in a public place and we see some sort of injustice taking place. Now, you don't have to put yourself in harm's way necessarily, but there was a time when I was in high school where my boyfriend at the time, we were at the movie theater and he grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me and I hit my head against a wall, like a stone wall. And there were people walking all around and I was a young girl. And nobody stopped to say, hey, are you okay? Is he hurting you? Should I call someone for you? Or even just anonymously calling 911 to get the situation de-escalated. Nobody did that. And it was going on for 45 minutes. If you're in a public place and you see something unjust happening to an innocent person, or you're concerned or afraid for your own safety because of the environment that you're in, you should do something about that. You can't just stand by idly or walk away and say, I'll pray for them when there's something that you could reasonably do, even if it's involving authorities.
Sure, I agree with you. What I'm referring to is there have been multiple stories about school shooters or people who go out and shoot a whole bunch of people in public, and there were warning signs 1,000 times before that event happened. For every single one of those red flags, those warning signs, there was someone in authority who could have acted, which was their job to do. And in the end, they didn't act multiple times until finally the event happens. And then a random bystander who happens to be concealed carrying protects everyone. But at the end of the day, people still get shot. You have responsibilities. All of us at one time or another are going to be called to take action, and it will be our responsibility. If you offload that responsibility because it's too complicated or too difficult, God will still find someone else to do the job. But bad things will happen as a result.
So I see this connected to Jericho a lot and the failure of AI shortly after. You have this idea that, especially whenever righteous judgment is happening, there's this Lot's wife is not supposed to look back. Like this man, I can't remember the name, something from Jericho that was dedicated for destruction. Everything was supposed to be dedicated to God for destruction, to be purified, to wipe out the very existence of Jericho because it was impure, similar to what we read on like Sodom and Gomorrah. Like it is dedicated for destruction. And the lack of response from God, I think in this instance, is looking more like Levi and Simeon took it too far, as in plundering and taking for themselves what was not theirs. That with Saul too, he takes these sacrifices, the bulls of the other nation, and he is saying that he's taking them to sacrifice to God. But Samuel's response from God is, I prefer obedience over frivolous sacrifices. And I see that here. And I do agree. I think it was Jacob's responsibility to respond to the situation, and he forced the hand of his sons. And at that point, they had gone further than somebody who should have been taking action. The head of the household should have been taking action. And I don't know the A&E thoughts. Like, I know if this was like Rachel or Leah that got raped, it would be an act of usurping, and maybe that's Jacob's inaction. Like, his status is not in question here at all, so he's passive to the situation. But I don't think inaction is correct here.
Agreed.
So thinking about the parallels here between Sodom and Gomorrah, can we even reasonably answer why God doesn't pull a Sodom and Gomorrah every time a person cries out when something bad happens to them? Like, how bad do things have to get for us to respond? Are we waiting for Jesus to be the judge and the jury and the executioner? Or is there ever a time now when we can respond the way that Simeon and Levi did?
I think we're to a point where diplomacy is more important than aggression in the sense, but if injustice is happening, if somebody were to break into our house, I have firearms and I'm fully prepared to use them on anybody who means me or my family harm. Do I want it to come to that? No. If there was a way to stop it before it came to that, absolutely take that route. But I do think there is a time, is it Ecclesiastes? There's a time for war. There's a time for peace. There is a time to act and a joy. There's a time to mourn. Like there's all is there. You just got to know the appropriate time to do.
It's difficult as Christians to gel the idea that we're supposed to love everyone. And yet, if we're in war, we have to kill our brothers and sisters who we love. That's a very difficult idea. And I can see why there are a lot of Christians who descend into pacifism. They say, no, we can't kill anybody. We can't harm anyone. Jesus says, turn the other cheek. And they slightly misconstrue a number of verses to indicate pacifism, but that's not what Jesus taught. There's a point where he takes the disciples aside and if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. I'm going to be leaving you soon. He tells the people of the church that we have the right to defend ourselves. And if you got a sword, it's going to be used. It's not used to just hurt people. Ultimately, if you're going to use a weapon, you use as much force as is necessary. When Jesus says, the meek shall inherit the earth, that's what we should be aiming for, to have power, to have strength, but keep it reserved for when it's necessary. And that's a very difficult thing, because it's the simple way to go one direction or the other, to always go for justice, that if you do something wrong, you die. Or to say, no, everyone gets mercy. God is both. He's both just and merciful. And the hardest answer is, it depends. There's no clean answer. Just as looking at this story, there's no clean answer to whether or not these two boys did something completely wrong or completely right. It seems like it's somewhere in the middle. It's understandable at the very least. They definitely went too far, but can we fully condemn them for what they did?
When I think about like the life that we're in now, it's one thing to be in ancient times where people died young and they lived in tents and they didn't have health care and they didn't understand hygiene the way that we do today. All of those things, it's easy to think, oh, they're primitive, and we can put it in terms of the Game of Thrones. Is it Game of Thrones? Dothraki people, and they're like super primitive and they just take what they want and grunt and it's whatever. That's not really the case. That's not accurate. But then when you put it in context of today's terms, like 1 in 4 women in our world, minimum, knows what it feels like to be sexually assaulted in some way. Like in Brazil, the 5th most common form of crime is rape. And in the United States, it's like the 6th and 7th are rape and murder. They are prevalent crimes. And then you think about human trafficking and crimes against children, the Jeffrey Epstein nonsense that's been in the news that everybody wants to know more information about. Like all of that stuff happened against girls that were similar age to Dinah. And it's easy to sensationalize it and make it a news thing and then be desensitized to it as a consumer because you're reading about it. And I don't know anybody that was at Epstein Island, and I might know somebody who's affected by sexual assault, but like they're dealing with it and they seem to be okay, maybe, or maybe not. I don't know. But as a Christian, we should be grieving these types of crimes. And no, God's not going to sweep in and smite all of the bad people. That would be missing the point of the free will that we have on this earth. But if we're of the royal priesthood and we are walking out being made in the image of God, I'm not saying we smite people, but like we speak up. We weep for those people. We weep with the people who weep, and we nurture the people who need nurtured, and we protect the most vulnerable people in our societies and pray that God does something to end it, but not leave it at prayer. Like righteousness isn't just thinking that you're right and saying things that you think are right. It's doing things that are right. And so if that means being the hands and feet of Jesus and crying with somebody, or if it means being an activist or joining a task force because you're really good at computers or something, use what you've got where you are, and don't accept that these things continue to go up in numbers. And just so you guys know, like one of the leading statistics in America for sex offenders right now, like the number one age group is ages 13 through 18. And it's fueled by pornography, like violence seen in pornography. So it's a major problem in America and worldwide. And I think as Christians, there's a lot more that we could be saying and doing against these things. And we're too afraid in this diplomacy that Cody talked about. It's okay to have big thoughts and feelings about these things, say things and act on them. You have to do it in a Christ-like way, and you can't go murder a whole civilization, but you do have a certain amount of responsibility for action and not just belief.
Absolutely. One of the scariest verses for me in the Bible is in Matthew, and it's when Jesus is calling those to him, and I think it's in Matthew 22. I can look it up after I finish my thought, but basically Jesus is saying, "Depart from me. I never knew you. When I was hungry, you never fed me. When I was cold, you never clothed me. When I was in need, you weren't there." And the response is, "We've done great things in your names, but you didn't do anything to fulfill my needs. Like I was there and you didn't do anything to fulfill my immediate needs." And that should scare the living crap out of any Christian who is passive in their Christianity. I don't think anyone's here saying go become a vigilante, go become anything that would put yourself in harm's way. But like Roe v. Wade was overturned. And one of the things that frustrated me the most is like all of these Christians were like, "Oh, we've won the battle. We've won the war." No, this is a step up moment for you as a Christian who fought for the sanctity of life to step in and help the mothers in need who now can't get an abortion. They shouldn't get one. I'm very advocating for life, but you can't think that this is just going to go away because Roe v. Wade was overturned. This is a deeper calling to step into fulfilling the needs of that baby who is now going to be put into a terrible situation, most likely, with the statistics on abortion.
We've seen it firsthand, Cody. You don't have to tiptoe. We've seen children in our home that have had their bones broken intentionally by their parents. Like, we've seen all forms of child abuse. It's very real in your own community, listener.
But what are you doing about that? What are you doing to be a Christian?
Are you Jacob at this instance? Are you someone who knows something is happening and you have the power to do something? God has put it on you. Are you going to be like Jacob and say, "You know what? It's easier to just go along. It's not my problem." Or are you going to take action? And not like Simeon, not like Levi.
No.
That's not the point. The point is, are you going to be the man that Jacob should have been, that he knew he should have been, but didn't be? Because otherwise something worse will happen.
I know it can feel intimidating too. So if you're in a situation where you're aware of something and you need our advice or you want us to connect you with local resources, we're happy to do that. If you need ideas for how to put your faith into action in something like this, reach out to us because we will not hesitate to help you find the right place for where you can be the hands and feet. But I know this was a tough one. It was difficult for me personally, just having young daughters and also just knowing what I know from my experience in birth work, because I work with very poor, low income families who in a lot of cases would have chosen abortion if they could have. So it hits home for me and it's vulnerable for me, but this is one of the most important chapters in the Bible to me because it not only includes a situation that's unthinkable for a woman, especially a young woman like Dinah, but it also covers a lot of different responses to those things. And I don't think that anybody gave us the correct response here. And I think that's what we can really walk away from learning is the true meaning of righteousness and justice and how we can live that out today. But it's not easy, and you'll have to face things that you're uncomfortable with that make you want to throw up. But it's important that we care about those things. It's important that we stop worrying so much about what the neighbors think and start acting on what Jesus would consider to be righteous, because there is one thing I never want to hear from the Lord on my dying day, and that's that he never knew me. I want to be so much like Jesus that he hugs me and welcomes me and tells me, "Well done." And he would not do that for me if I ignored somebody in need. Not that salvation is works-based, but our works matter. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our podcast today. If you liked what you heard, please feel free to subscribe and share and leave a positive review. And if you would like to connect with us on social media, you can do so on Instagram and Facebook at The Logic of God. You can also send us an email at main.thelogicofgod@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. We hope you have a great day.